A new flashpoint is emerging in the Western Hemisphere as global power politics collide over Venezuela's oil lifeline. In just a matter of days, the United States announced a sweeping naval blockade on Venezuelan oil shipments, labeled the Maduro government a foreign terrorist organization, and signaled readiness for further military action, while China stepped forward to publicly back Caracas, condemning what it called unilateral coercion. As Venezuela responds by deploying warships to escort tankers bound for Asia, and the U.S. Congress narrowly rejects efforts to curb the president's military authority in the Caribbean, the standoff is rapidly escalating beyond a regional dispute into a broader test of sovereignty, international law, and great power rivalry. The current escalation between the United States and Venezuela marks one of the most aggressive phases of Washington's pressure campaign against Caracas in years, both in rhetoric and in concrete military posture. The turning point came on December 16, when U.S. President Donald Trump publicly announced that he had ordered a full blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers heading to or departing from Venezuela. Framed as a punitive measure, the blockade was explicitly tied to demands that Venezuela return what Trump described as all the oil, land, and other assets allegedly taken from the United States. At the same time, the Maduro government was formally designated a foreign terrorist organization, a label that dramatically widens the scope of potential U.S. actions under domestic counterterrorism authorities. This move goes far beyond traditional sanctions. A naval blockade, whether formally declared or informally enforced through interceptions, sits in a legally ambiguous space under international law, especially outside a declared state of war. While Washington has justified its actions as enforcement of sanctions and counter-narcotics operations, the practical effect is a de facto maritime chokehold on Venezuela's most critical economic artery, energy exports. Oil and oil-related products remain central to Venezuela's survival, and disrupting tanker traffic strikes directly at state revenue, foreign trade, and political stability. This pressure campaign did not emerge in isolation. Prior to the blockade announcement, the United States had already seized a sanctioned oil tanker off Venezuela's coast, and at least 4 other tankers reportedly altered course after the interception of the vessel's skipper. In parallel, the Pentagon acknowledged carrying out more than 20 strikes on vessels suspected of drug trafficking in waters near Venezuela and Colombia, operations that resulted in dozens of fatalities. While officially framed as counter-narcotics efforts, these strikes further militarized the maritime environment and sent a clear message that U.S. naval dominance in the Caribbean and adjacent waters would be actively enforced. Equally significant is the political context inside Washington. In the days following Trump's announcement, the U.S. House of Representatives voted on 2 resolutions aimed at restricting the administration's ability to conduct military operations in the Caribbean, including actions against Venezuela. Both measures failed by razor-thin margins, 216 to 210 and 213 to 211, despite overwhelming Democratic support and a small but notable number of Republicans breaking party lines. The failure of these resolutions effectively reaffirmed the president's broad freedom of action, signaling to both allies and adversaries that institutional constraints on escalation remain weak. China's response to the U.S. escalation against Venezuela was swift, deliberate, and carefully worded, but no less significant for its diplomatic restraint. On December 18, just hours after President Trump announced naval measures targeting Venezuelan oil shipments, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi publicly voiced Beijing's support for Caracas during a conversation with his Venezuelan counterpart, Ivan Gil. While Wang avoided explicitly naming the United States, the timing left little doubt about the target of his message. China, he said, opposes unilateral coercion, supports nations in defending their sovereignty and national dignity, and rejects restrictions imposed outside the framework of international consensus. This statement reflects a consistent through-line in Chinese foreign policy, but its importance in this case lies in context. Venezuela is not merely another sanctioned state, it sits at the intersection of energy security, great power competition, and the contested norms of global governance. By backing Venezuela's right to pursue mutually beneficial cooperation with other countries, Beijing was implicitly defending its own economic and strategic interests, particularly its access to energy supplies and its broader opposition to U.S.-led sanctions regimes. China's stance also signals to the wider international community, especially countries in the global south, that Beijing positions itself as a counterweight to what it portrays as U.S. unilateralism. Wang Yi's assertion that the broader international community generally supports Venezuela's right to independent cooperation is less a factual claim than a political narrative, one in which sovereignty and non-interference are framed as universal principles under threat from Western power projection. Whether or not that narrative fully holds, it resonates strongly with states that have themselves faced sanctions or external pressure. At the same time, Beijing's diplomatic message was reinforced by a series of symbolic and material signals. Earlier, China conducted the maiden flight of the Jiutian unmanned aerial vehicle, described as the world's largest UAV and unofficially dubbed a drone aircraft carrier due to its ability to deploy swarms of smaller drones. While not directly linked to Venezuela, the timing underscores China's broader effort to showcase advanced military-industrial capabilities amid rising global tensions. It serves as a reminder that China is no longer merely reacting diplomatically, it is increasingly prepared to project technological and strategic power. This episode also fits into China's deepening coordination with Russia, particularly in military and industrial domains. Both Beijing and Moscow share an interest in challenging what they see as U.S. dominance over international economic and security mechanisms. Venezuela, in this sense, becomes a strategic node rather than an isolated case, a place where opposition to sanctions, defense of state sovereignty, and resistance to regime change rhetoric converge. From my perspective, China's intervention is less about defending Nicolás Maduro personally and more about defending a world order in which U.S. power is constrained. Beijing understands that if naval blockades and extraterritorial sanctions become normalized tools of statecraft, no energy-importing nation or sanctioned partner is truly safe. By drawing a line, rhetorically, at least, China is signaling that Venezuela's crisis is not just a bilateral U.S. issue, but a stress test for the rules governing global trade, navigation, and political independence. Venezuela's response to Washington's blockade rhetoric and actions has been measured but unmistakably defiant, signaling that Caracas has no intention of yielding under pressure. Following President Trump's statements on December 16, Venezuelan authorities ordered the deployment of naval forces to escort vessels carrying petroleum products as they departed the country's ports. According to reports on December 17, multiple cargo ships left Venezuela's coast overnight under the protection of warships, carrying consignments of urea, petroleum coke, and other oil industry products, most of them destined for Asian markets. This move is symbolically powerful and strategically risky. By escorting tankers, Venezuela is asserting what it calls its lawful right to freedom of navigation, a principle enshrined in international maritime law. State oil company PDVSA emphasized that vessels linked to its operations continue to sail in complete safety, supported by technical and operational guarantees. At the same time, Caracas sharply criticized Trump's statements as irresponsible, warning that they pose a serious risk of escalation and accusing the United States of violating international law. In effect, Venezuela is framing itself not as a rogue actor, but as a state defending its sovereignty against external aggression. Yet the presence of armed escorts in waters where the United States already conducts interdictions and counter-narcotics strikes dramatically raises the stakes. A U.S. administration official confirmed that Washington is aware of Venezuela's actions and is actively assessing response options. History shows how easily such situations can spiral. Close encounters at sea, miscalculations, or conflicting rules of engagement could transform political signaling into a real military incident. The fact that the Pentagon has already carried out more than 20 strikes on vessels in nearby waters, resulting in dozens of deaths, underscores how volatile the environment already is. Compounding this risk is the political narrative coming from Washington. Trump has repeatedly stated that the United States could strike targets on land and has openly called for Nicolás Maduro to be removed from power. When paired with the designation of Venezuela's government as a foreign terrorist organization, these statements blur the line between economic pressure and outright regime change doctrine. In such a context, even defensive actions by Venezuela can be interpreted by U.S. policymakers as provocations, narrowing the space for de-escalation. Venezuela's gamble rests on two assumptions. First, that U.S. allies and major trading partners, especially in Asia, will resist a full enforcement of the blockade, and second, that China and other powers will continue to provide diplomatic, economic, and potentially strategic backing. This is a high-stakes bet. While naval escorts demonstrate resolve, they also expose Venezuela's limited military capacity compared to the United States. The real leverage lies not at sea, but in whether Washington can sustain international support for its actions.